Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
For those of you that don't know me, I'm Rick Mullins, the Executive Assistant to the President at CCSU, and I oversee the operations of the Institute of Technology and Business Development. It's a pleasure to have you here with us this morning. Thank you to responding to our numerous emails and other media that we use to get this out, as well as some of the good old-fashioned hand-to-hand, eyeball-to-eyeball combat that we have to do out in the business world every day. But this is the start of our 8th season of the Executive Breakfast Series, which is quite an accomplishment. It was first initiated by the CCSU Alumni Association as a new initiative to draw alumni in and businesses in to get more engaged with the university, and over the years it's been quite successful. We've had a number of different topics. Every year we kind of look at what are the hot topics out there and formulate a plan with Dr. Fearon from the School of Business to moderate these sessions. This year, for the 3rd year in a row, we're grateful to TD Bank for sponsoring this breakfast series. There'll be 3 of them. I'll talk more about them towards the closure of the meeting, but figure for February, maybe you could be back, and sometime in April for 2 other interesting topics. The topic after this one today is going to be looking at valuing your business, because many businesses don't know what their value is worth, the value of their business is worth, until they're ready to make a change in a critical situation. Not the best time to value your business. And the 3rd one will be on the Affordable Health Care Act, which we'll do in April once this is settled down a little bit, as we all know. These are very trying times in the business world with budgets and sequestration and so forth. I'd like to thank TD Bank and all of their supporters. John Cookley is here with us from across the street, and one of the senior vice presidents over at TD Bank, for their continued support of this. Every year we reach out, talk with the various businesses around, and they've stepped up graciously to support us. We certainly do appreciate that relationship, and also the relationship we share with the Alumni Association, who helps to market this to all of our alums, and the chambers and downtown district as well. We have our friends here today from the Labor Department. If you could just raise your hand down there in the back. Thank you so much for coming. These are the important people that help many of us with our workforce development issues. And when you do have a workforce development need, Karen Quisnell and Janice Albert are great people locally to deal with. They have a terrific network, and please do give them a call. They are your friends, and they do a terrific job. So thank you for joining us, guys. I appreciate that. The topic, social media policy, came to light as a result of a discussion I had with our Vice President of Institutional Advancement, Chris Galligan, and one of our faculty members, Polly Silva, earlier in the year. She's an adjunct faculty member, and unfortunately couldn't join us on the panel as she's taking a full-time position in the corporation. But this topic is one that we are all dealing with on a regular basis, whether you're a smartphone user, the traditional laptop, desktop, tablet now user. People are, from their companies, Twittering, Facebooking, LinkedIn-ing, if you will, all these different medias, and I'm sure there's a whole host of others out there. What they're doing, when they're doing it, who they're doing it with, where they're at, sometimes not in the best type of situations. I know of companies like many here that go back 3 months when they make a hire and look on social media for some of the things about that potential employee to see if they're going to be an embarrassment to the company, or there's other issues associated with it. I happen to have 2 college-age kids myself, one a senior and graduating, and I told them right from the start, be very careful. Everybody's got a camera. Everyone has a camera on their hip. And at the most inappropriate time, you could be the subject of the next YouTube video. And you may not have any control over it. So when we discussed this topic, we thought, wow, I think we're onto something, because as we talk to many companies, they don't have a social media policy. So the session today with Dr. Fearon and the panel, we're going to talk about what are the issues associated with social media policy. What do you need to look for? What should you have in yours? What have some of these companies found out as they develop the policy? It's quite complex. I'm sure that you'll come away with a gold nugget or 2 that you can take back to the office and implement in your space. That's the purpose of these sessions. for you to pick up one gold nugget that you can bring back and help improve your business. Without much further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. David Fearon, a professor in our School of Business and Management and Organization. David Fearon will introduce our panelists, and we'll get right into the subject. Thank you all very much. David.
Thank you, Rick. Well, I'm going to work down here on your behalf to make sure that we extract some really good gems of gold from the panel, which I'm sure we will, but also to make sure that you can be engaged, and at any point during the hour, if I see some energy around someone who looks like they might like to make a comment or raise a question, I'm sure the panel can work into that flow. But let's put policy into perspective. What if at this moment I asked you, and I won't, pick up everything that you now have on this table, put it in your lap or somewhere else? What's the table? Anyone? This is about policy. What is the table? It's policy. So you're now entering into the domain that's just emerging and will be with our lives for the rest of our lives, called the social media. And if you do not have a policy, it will feel like not having this table. You can put your elbows on the table, you can put your coffee on the table, you can have your breakfast, you can gather around it for meetings. The table is the policy. Now, if you have a policy the size of a tiny vase stand, and you've got 100 people working with you, there's very little support for those moments when you must plant your feet and say yes or no to some kind of behavior. So our goal today is to have you walking out of the room, going back to your workplace, looking around for that policy table around social media and checking its size, making sure it has strong legs, and that people can gather around it for the strategic conversations that you're going to hear about with this panel. So you can put all your stuff back on your table now in your imagination. So why don't we start moving down through, first just as you're introducing yourself, Rob, what do you think of that table analogy? Does that work for your organization?
I like it. I think that the social media policy provides structure, and if there's not structure, it makes a lot of people in the organization really uncomfortable, and part of going through that exercise is just to alleviate some of those fears that social media might be the end of the world if you engage or if your employees are out there being active. So I'm Rob McGinnis. I am the e-communications manager at Pratt & Whitney. What that means is a lot of things depending on the day. I'm our intranet news editor. I've got editorial control of our external website. I've got our social media accounts. I've got I consult on the business-related social media accounts, so the Pure Power Engine and the F-135 engine. And then I do general editorial work for major projects and other organizations within Pratt & Whitney that need help. I've been our social media account administrator since we started, so 4+ years now. And I was part of the team that created the policy back in 2011 and 2012, so we went a couple of years without having one. So I can tell you all about how we got there and what were some of the steps that we went through to develop a policy within the structure of a large company and with lots of stakeholders who want to have a voice and make sure they're represented well.
Wow, so there's one of our major Fortune 5 companies that has a table, but Rob helped build it, and it has 4 legs now?
It does.
Okay. Fathom, Susie Gregg.
Hello, everyone. I'm Susie Craig. I'm the Director of Market and Opportunity at Fathom. We're strategic advisors that help businesses transform their brands. Essentially, partners come to us when they're at usually a big tipping point with their business, and they want to know how their brand can catch up and evolve with that business to make sure that the world outside really understands who they are, where they're coming from, and how they can engage with them. So my role at Fathom is to help start the right conversations so that we can find the most benefit from the work that we do. I love your table analogy, Doc, because the table is something that no one thinks of, right?
Exactly.
And no one sees it, but it's really important. So I love that analogy. It's fantastic because, and it's rare to have an entire conversation about this, right? Because it's something no one really wants to think about or take care of. But when the time comes when you need it and it's not there, boy, do you feel it, so.
So your company encourages your clients to use social media to get their message out and to make those strategic connections. On the other hand, without a solid policy, your client organizations could make some bad moves on that, some moves that don't work in their favor for their brand.
Sure, and some of the things I'll be talking about too is the opportunity to do the work of building a policy. It's not just about rules of conduct and finger pointing and the don't do this, don't do that, but it's an opportunity to generate a conversation around how do we communicate with the outside world and who communicates and how do we get that work done.
So the Walker Group, Jessica, you're not only working in a company that helps with the technology supporting social media, but you are also involved with your own employees and their behavior. So tell us about your perspective on the table issue.
Well, I also really enjoyed that analogy, although I'm not going to lie, I was a little confused on where you were going with it at first. Maybe it's early, but come on, you guys are with me here. Okay, good, all right. Whew.
I sprung it on them.
Yeah. So I'm Jessica Rich. I am the Director of Operations and Employee Services at the Walker Group. We are an IT services firm located right over in Farmington. So we help companies manage all aspects of their IT situation. We do on-site support, remote support, cloud hosting, IT security, web interactive, and we've recently started doing some IT staffing as well. So my perspective heading up in the employee management side is that we are a small company of just about 55 employees, and we're a very social group, fairly young staff, and everybody uses social media. Everybody's friends with one another, and so we actually still do not have a social media policy, but we are, I'm in the process of revamping our entire employee handbook. So as of January, we will have one, and it's been an interesting exercise to go through because already you hear people going, uh-oh, policy, this is sounding very corporate, I don't like it, I'm going to start defriending everyone here. And so it's been an interesting exercise to go through, and I've been learning a lot about the different types of policies out there. So we're in the final stages of it, so this is actually timely for me too, because I'm hoping you guys can help me.
Well, I think Dan and his firm will definitely have some role, his sorts of firms, because what makes a policy ultimately strong enough to hold a lot of different things that are placed on it is its legality. So Dan, give us your introduction, a little bit about your thoughts on this.
Sure, I'm Dan Schwartz. I'm a partner at Shipman & Goodwin in Hartford, Connecticut, where I practice employment law for basically employers, providing advice on everything from HR-related issues to privacy to now an increasing part is dealing with social media issues. I also do a blog on employment law issues called the Connecticut Employment Law Blog, which you can just Google and you will find it. So I've been in this space for about 6 years. In fact, Rob and I were on a panel about 4 years ago, really before laws and this general sense that you need a policy really came into play. And it's amazing how quickly this has become not only a like to have, but a really need to have for companies. And I think it's caught a lot of companies off guard. One reason why that is because it used to be you put up the firewalls at work on your computers and that was it. Everyone had to do work when you were at the office, or at least go out on smoking breaks or talk at the water cooler if they wanted their free time. Now you've got these devices in here which are the most powerful devices that we have. They're much more powerful than the desktop computers you were using 10 years ago. You can take photos, you can share information quickly, and I think the law, if we're waiting for the law to provide you answers, the law is behind the times. We're just seeing laws now on using social media for hiring. Can you ask applicants for passwords? A lot of states have said no. Connecticut doesn't yet have it, but I suspect in this term coming up, they'll be quick to add that as well. And you have agencies like the National Labor Relations Board, which have been striking down policies or procedures or actions that companies have had at both union and non-union workplaces. But we're all playing catch up. So what we've been trying to do from a legal perspective is stay ahead of that, give you some guidelines to say, all right, I'm not going to solve all the problems with a policy or guidelines, but what are some rules of the road that you can put in place that will fit your company culture and that will avoid some of the issues that are coming up on a day-to-day basis?
Rob, you were just cited here, and 4 years doesn't seem like a long while ago, but in the world of the evolution of social media, it's a century. So you have a company that clearly is in a world where privacy is huge and intellectual property and all those issues in terms of the responsibilities of employees. Can you remember the day when it looked like you needed to go from sort of ad hoc to when you knew you had to build that structure? And he's kindly shared on your tables an example of the policy that's still being built and will probably continue to be modified. So tell us a little bit about that early day and what's, in a nutshell, what's happened since.
Sure. So when we first started with social media, we started slowly, and it took a lot of convincing first. I spent a lot of time monitoring and just seeing what was being said about Pratt & Whitney out on Twitter and out on Facebook and wherever else we could find mentions of the company. And the first justification for starting a Twitter account almost 5 years ago now was, look, the reporters who cover us in trade magazines, they're out there, they talk about us, and they're speaking favorably, but what if they aren't? And that made the PR folks say, yeah, let's think about this. And then not long afterward, we got involved in the alternate engine debate, and I don't know how many folks are familiar with that. There was a point where Pratt & Whitney, we still make the F-135 engine, but GE and Rolls-Royce were making an alternate engine. And beginning in 2006 or 7, the DoD stopped requesting funding, Congress would restore the funding, and then in 2009, it actually got the president's attention, and he said, we don't need this extra engine, the one we have is doing fine, and when the president endorses your product like that, it's a good day. But the fight really raged up at that point. GE and Rolls picked up their pace of conversation, and we needed to get involved, and we established social media channels to accommodate a much larger communications plan. We wanted employees to get involved. We wanted them to advocate for us. Wow. And when we first sent them out there, we said, here's the rules in general, and a lot of those were retained when we came up with guidelines. And once we got through that campaign, it was time. We had to have something more structured and formal in place.
So in part, that was fostered by this really hugely competitive environment that every business in this room is experiencing. And it seems I'm inferring that one of the key things is to be sure that what is said is factual.
Absolutely.
And that's very hard because every one of us interprets the table differently, if you will. So tell us a little bit, Susie, about how you're advocating for the good part of the social media, and yet how you're helping people recognize that there's it's a double-edged sword.
Sure. A lot of times when we work with clients on a social media policy, we start the conversation at the beginning of why. Why are you doing this?
Why, exactly.
It sounds like a simple question, but it really is important to go back to that. What is the purpose of actually having the policy? And that can open up the floodgates as to, what and how you communicate with the outside world. And a lot of times we help clients, look beyond the word policy, because I don't know about you, but that word gives me hives. So really, it's a strategy. It's a strategy for how the people inside your walls communicate with people outside your walls, and who does that. And obviously, there's rules of conduct, and there's guidelines, and things you should and shouldn't do. But there's also opportunity for some of your employees who are really excited about social media and already really out there having conversations to support that effort. Some companies build in promotions and career, motivations essentially into it. If they're building conversations and relationships with customers just naturally and organically, why wouldn't you support that? And obviously you need to provide training, and you need to make sure that everybody's on the same page with how they're representing the company and how they're going out there, whether it's their off time or during work time. But there's a lot of ways to look at this as an opportunity to really engage your employees, and then help connect those employees with the world outside.
I think that's a great segue, Jessica, to this question. Why don't you just take a policy and set of guidelines that already exist, bring it in, tweak it, and now we've got it. You know, why do all this employee involvement thing? It's going to be endless. Lots of disagreements.
No, definitely. That's actually how I started the whole exercise, was to go out there. I said, well, somebody's got policies, I'm sure they're out there, and there's a lot of them out there. And every single one of them is so different that it really became very overwhelming. I mean, there was everything out there from, social media policy to digital participation guidelines to, top 10 tips for using social media. I mean, it was just like, wait, is this a friendly little suggestion article or is this a policy?
Yeah.
And I looked at Apple's, I looked at Best Buy's, I looked at small companies, large companies. So it really becomes a very overwhelming exercise to go through. And then I started with some of the smaller ones, sample handbooks that are available, and some of those policies are much shorter, and all they do is refer back to other employee policies like anti-discrimination and anti-harassment policies. And they weren't really very specific about social media, even though that was the title. So, the conclusion that I've come to is that it's really understanding the culture of the company and what the culture can tolerate as far as the policy, and what is the most important thing to us as an employer. It's to protect our employees from harassment and things like that happening, because in a small company that's more of the risk.
Sure.
And then it's to protect our privacy. So designing a policy around that, and potentially also offering some guidelines, which are a lot easier to read, the sort of do's and don'ts, is probably the way that we're going to end up going.
Dan, what's the legal perspective here on the choices being, off the shelf, tweak versus work it from the ground up, from, as she just said and was also said by the other three, start with the employees as they are in their culture and work something from inside out?
Well, I always think you should hire a lawyer to go through it. No. I think with respect, I've actually given you on your table just some examples of 2 social media policies. They should not be just used willy-nilly. You should tailor them to your company, but they should give you ideas. And I want you to think conceptually that there are a couple of different ideas that we're talking about here. One is employee use of social media off duty, sort of, what are your employees doing off the clock on that? Did anyone see the viral video that went around this week of the employee who announced that she was quitting on YouTube, dancing? That's the type of thing. By the way, if you've seen that, you should check out the employer's response to that came out yesterday, which was having the bosses, in case you hadn't seen the video was an employee who came into their office at 4:30 in the morning and did a dancing video in the office announcing she was quitting. Received 10 million hits on YouTube within 24 hours or something like that. The employer yesterday came out with their own response that had the employees dancing, showed their rooftop pool. We should all be so lucky in our office. But also basically their suggestion is, we're hiring. We now have an opening, and dancing is a job prerequisite. So, you're really talking about employee use of social media, and then you're talking about things like Rob is in charge of how are you managing your company's social media channels, your YouTube, your Facebook, frankly, the things that we haven't talked about yet, Instagram and Vine, which are huge now, and I think becoming an increasing focus of people, which is how do you deal with your office when everyone has these cameras and can take videos of everything in your office? How do you protect your trade secrets? It's become very complicated from a company perspective, but try to break it down into manageable components. I think look online for some samples, but engage, figure out who within your company is either interested in the topic or using it or needs to be involved, and develop your policy organically from there. You're not going to need, if you're a smaller company, you may not need all of these guidelines. You may need a couple. But ultimately, you need something that fits, that is legal, that doesn't overstep the boundaries of what the NLRB has said, which is that employees have the right to engage in certain types of conduct, even if you don't like it. And ultimately, that it's a policy that's enforceable too. You can have all these guidelines, but if you're not enforcing it or the employees ignore it, you might as well not have a policy.
Let's talk about that, Rob, from your perspective, because you have a lot of employees.
We do.
And some are maybe a little bit restive right now because of their certain things happening with the size of the workforce. And you just might have a few people who wouldn't mind doing a dance on one of your tables.
Probably not.
I don't hate to be negative here, but the bigger you are, the more potential you are. That someone with one of these can do something that will be harmful to the company.
Absolutely. We have 32,000 employees
Right.
worldwide, and it's a big company. And the earlier points about what's right for the culture and what's right for the type of the organization, our policy refers to several dozen other policies that are cross-referenced that I'm sure no one has ever read, and that's okay, because we try to educate, we try to engage, and we try to empower. We spend a lot of time on education. So as far as the camera phone point, we've always had an intellectual property policy. There's certainly an export control policy. We know that now better than we ever have. And what we do is we tell people about the rules. There was a point when I joined the company, you couldn't have a camera phone, and this was 8 years ago, so camera phones weren't quite as prevalent then. But to have that policy now makes almost no sense because camera phones are on almost every cell phone you can buy in the stores. But we'll tell people what's acceptable and what's not. If you go out in the shop with a camera and you don't have I'm not wearing my badge right now, but if you don't have a badge that says communications programs or photographer, people will stop you. I think it's part of the culture to protect what's going on in the shop. You walk into a military engines part of the shop, the hourly employees and the managers will walk over and say, should you have that camera here? Do you know what you're taking pictures of? And they're just doing their regular work. They're not communications people. So I think that's part of the culture to protect what's there and understanding that it is sensitive. So that goes beyond the social media policy into just general policy and structure and awareness of what we do.
It seems to me that this raises the question even higher that I hope we all have, which is how committed are our fellow employees? How invested are they in the culture and taking care of the company and not just themselves? There have been a lot of tests of that in the last 10 or 15 years, particularly with the movement toward a more temporary workforce. And what's the obligation of someone who's going to be rented for a year or two to work in the company versus someone who sees a long-term future? So either Susie or Jess, could you kind of reflect on that? Because we are talking ultimately about high-mindedness, people really caring about the company. How do you work on that as a
Yeah, I think
consultant?
there's that, Dave, and I also think that people need to understand the impact of their actions and what they're saying, and
Yeah.
the fact that what they're saying is actual action. So I think it's easy to get comfortable on Facebook or wherever you're, out there on social media and have a conversation with someone, and suddenly you could find yourself in a very heated political debate. And
Absolutely.
meanwhile, you're representing your company, whether you know it or not. Usually your networks know who you work for. So it's being really, really upfront with your employees about what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and how you're out there.
Anyone else want to pick up on that? Jess?
Yeah, it's a lot of what we see being a smaller company is, thank you, is really a lot of gray area when it comes to social media. So we'll have things like, an employee posts something on their Facebook, what a bad day at work today. I worked with like the most impossible coworker, something like that. And people know who they're talking about. There's no names, there's no company name, but that person is linked to a company. So it sort of snowballs into this, and then two coworkers will like it, and then it becomes that employee hears about it, and they feel like they're being bullied. They feel like they're being harassed. But without a policy in place and without training the employees on, is it appropriate behavior, and how legal is it for us to say that you can't do exactly that? Who are you talking about? How are you doing it? Are there other employees involved? And again, to what Dan was saying, there's a lot of legal implications there. You would think as an employer, it's very easy to say in your policy you can't engage in inappropriate discussions about your coworkers or management. But that's not legal to say that. that's protected activity according to the NLRB, and that's really a difficult thing for an employer to try to protect its own employees against. So those are some of the challenges that we're finding.
Dan?
I think the important thing to realize is your employees have always been talking about you at the water cooler, at smoking breaks. You're just finding out about it now and seeing it. But don't overreact to every slight that happens on Facebook. Sometimes a bad day is just a bad day. And the employees need to be perhaps counseled and said, we heard what you said on Facebook. It's probably not a good idea to put it up there. You're not disciplining them. You're not firing them because they said something bad about you on Facebook that no one really saw anyways. So when I hear of employers who say, oh, my employee talked about me on Facebook, it's sort of are they sending it out via email too? I mean, we are where we were 10, 15 years ago with email. The norms are still developing on social media. I mean, when email first came out, my dad would send me the most inappropriate jokes because it was new. He would send me jokes. I'm like, I'm an employment lawyer, Dad. You can't send me raunchy jokes to work. You're going to get me in trouble. But
my finger.
If only. So social media, you've seen this development. You first saw the pictures of people posting, pictures of them drinking. Now people have become smart. I don't know if anyone has teenagers or college kids. A lot of them aren't even using their real name on Facebook anymore. They're using their first name and middle name, as if that was a big secret. But that's how they're communicating now. They're not using email anymore. You ask a college kid if they check their email, let alone voicemail, they're going to say no. They use text messages and they use things like Kik. And a lot of social networks that you haven't even heard of. So I think the most important thing for an employer is take some perspective, not overreact to every slight that happens on Facebook, and teach your employees about what you expect within your company so that they can use it to help your company ultimately and be the person out there. One last point to that. We're not just talking about Facebook, but you're also getting networks now like things like Yelp. Your company, maybe a small company, is getting reviews on Yelp. And what you ultimately want are your fans of your company to come in and help support you. That's a great use of social media. To have people who go, hey, that's wrong. That diner down the street, that's a great place to eat. The people there are really nice and you're being wrong about that. That's how social media can work to your benefit instead of just focusing on the negative aspects that tend to get more publicity and a lot more action out there.
A quick observation. I heard earlier the mention of an old-fashioned idea that when you're on the job, you're on the job, but when you step away, you're off the clock, you can be something else. And what I'm hearing now is, no, because you are who you are wherever you are, and one of these is always at hand. So that's one point. The other one is related to your point that new social media are emerging. That energy is like a force of water. You try to hold it and channel it in a policy or even a set of guidelines. I think that the upcoming generation is going to say, I can get around that. I can hack through that. I can get over that. Why? Because I think there's a deep impulse on all of us that are now enabled by these to communicate. We just want to, I guess it's how people know we exist. I exist, therefore I text. And so we're working in something that we can't really stop. And yet on the other hand, we just heard a really important point, is that you can turn that energy into something that will help grow the business. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Susie? Because a Yelp set of reviews can really hurt or help any kind of business where people want to buy something locally, all the way up to the big reviews that you get on Amazon, around books and so forth that are published.
Well, I just want to actually restate a quote that Dan said on our conference call that I've been using as a mantra, and it's information wants to be free, which I think goes back to
Yeah.
point
Good one.
about the water is essentially you cannot control it. It's out there, so go with it, and how do you go with it? There are some really interesting ways that companies have tackled this. And if you look on my tip sheet, there's a link to basically, I think it's called the Society for New Communications Research. They did a year researching policy. So a lot of this work has been done for you as far as, what to include in a policy. And if you look at the list, and it's from IBM to Aetna to whatever, just a list of policies, and you start going through them, you see how these companies have not just come up with a policy, but they've actually looked at their culture and their values and aligned that policy with that to make sure that this policy is something that can be enforced and adopted. So for instance, Wall Street Journal has in their policy, don't recruit family and friends to defend your work. That's very specific to their situation. Opera has a policy that says, we're not your mama, which basically says we're not going to be big brother and watching over you, so you have to be responsible for yourself. So this kind of goes back to Dan's earlier point of looking at the examples on the table and all the examples out there and making sure that you're tailoring it and aligning it to your company or culture. So that's a little bit off the point of what you, but essentially, it's really important to look at this as an opportunity to really expand that conversation about what your company's all about and how you go out there to the world.
I think we said earlier that it's very hard to even see a table until someone asks you, what would you do if it weren't there? And it also seems to me, going back to a big company like yours, Rob, that it's hard to remember all of these rules and norms and regulations. And so is there a hook? Is there something like information, needs to be free? Is there something like we're not your mama? And I mean, I know it sounds like we're cheapening something extremely important, but frankly, if the average employee doesn't have something to connect to right away when there's that opportunity at hand, then the rest of it doesn't even matter. So how do you get them hooked in to that issue?
Well, we don't have something quite so catchy as we're not your mama.
We know where you live.
We know where you live. Our guidance, we keep going back to the points in the guidance that relate to the most employees, but we've got lots of technical experts at Pratt & Whitney, very smart people who can speak at length on any number of technical topics. And if there's a discussion around our products that they want to get involved in, we advise them to make sure that, one, they're not divulging anything proprietary or that's highly sensitive, but making sure they represent the company appropriately. They're representing themselves. We want them to be transparent. So we'll go back and say, recognize that you represent Pratt & Whitney. Be responsible, be respectful, be transparent. And those points come back in internal news stories. We'll write about missteps that others have made on social media, and not to point out or make fun of anything, but just to illustrate that there are steps that you can take to avoid these situations, and there are ways not to fall into the traps. But it's all about education.
Good one. Now it's your turn. Yes, ma'am. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Judy Sprita. I'm the HR manager for Peter Paul Electronics here in New Britain. And in listening to the panel, and you guys have been phenomenal. Thank you so much. My question really is for Dan. We had a situation a couple of years ago where a temporary employee attacked one of our employees out in the parking lot. Then we found out after the fact that all of that was planned on Facebook because this girl liked one of our other male employees at the same one that she, and this whole thing was, I mean, that's a safety issue and a legal issue now. And, is there any way a social media policy, I know you can't protect yourself against anything, but does it give it a little more teeth for doing an employment action when you find that out?
Certainly. For employment actions, we typically ask an employer, a more basic question, which is, how is this going to be perceived? Is this going to be perceived as being fair? Was the employee on notice that this type of actions this is the expected code of conduct, this is the expected level of performance? And if the employee hasn't met up to that, it's typically you're able to justify it a little bit more. That takes it out of the legal analysis, but that's what a lot of these cases come down to. I think there will always be the outliers. the people who are using it for their own benefit. If you look up Starbucks rant video, there is a barista out there who got dressed just in a barista's apron and did a video berating Starbucks customers. You know, the one who orders the skinny latte who's fat, you know, that type of thing. Starbucks, you know, didn't really get into the debate online. They fired the employee, obviously. They put up with the negative publicity for a day or two and moved on from there. American Airlines has a case, had a situation of an employee who dressed up, it was a flight attendant who dressed up as a female personality, called himself the Sky Steward, and who would make fun of the company as an employee. Again, American Airlines sort of said, hey, look, you know, he's divulging information about our customers and respect. They took it out of he's using social media, and they relate it back to a more fundamental policy that you've always been able to enforce. So instead, you know, we talk about social media as a policy, and you should, but it doesn't mean you throw out all of the other rules that you've had to begin with. If it's harassment, it's harassment, whether it's online or not. So try not to overthink the issue. If it's inappropriate in real life, probably going to be inappropriate online too.
Okay, other questions? Yes. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Steve McChesney, and I work with Susie. And I have a question for you around two things. Personal branding as a vehicle to get at this, right? So it's not about, hey, I want you to do this because it's good for the company, right? It's an educational moment for personal branding. You know, that only goes so far. And then kind of what Dan was talking about as well, we all have a lot of overhead in terms of policies about what we should and shouldn't be doing, right? Like, I shouldn't be harassing my whole employees, regardless of whether I do it on email or voicemail or social media, it doesn't matter. So what's really germane to social media specifically, right? Because you know, you can have a social media policy that's 10 miles long and probably hits on a zillion other policies you already have in there. So what's really germane to social media that isn't covered by other things?
Well, a couple of examples. So Intel, in their policy, they have a statement that says something like, always think and pause before posting, which is really good. You know, if you think about it, you can be so reactionary with your phone, so that's a really good one to, you know, to have something very specific to it. The U.S. Air Force has a blogging flowchart, and if you think about what their policy must be like. So they have a really amazing flowchart that says, you know, here we're dealing with things that are topics, you know, that are pretty extreme, you know, if you see something, say something. So the chart actually goes through, you know, if this information is out there, what do you do with it? You know, is it critical? Yes, and it goes here, and then there are steps that you need to take. If it's not, just let it be. You know, it goes through this whole thing. So I think that I think this work actually does take a lot of thought and a lot of strategy to think like, okay, how, as far as my company and my situation goes, what is actually very specific to actions out there, and what actually happens on social media. And I think as far as the persona goes, Rob can talk about it. I think your company did an amazing job of mapping out user levels and engagement levels, so I don't know if you want to talk about
Yeah,
that.
tell us.
Sure. So there's some structure within our policy that defines levels of access at work and how one might represent themselves. So if you've got access at your desk but you don't represent the company, you're an individual. So that's just someone who can go on and monitor Twitter, maybe for competitive intelligence, just to see what's being said by the competition, any kind of a personal type use. They're individuals. They get a certain level of education, those intranet news stories I talked about. They get policy awareness kind of things. Beyond that, you've got agents. And agents are people like me who maintain company-branded social media accounts but who aren't personally visible. So I'm the voice behind Pratt & Whitney on Twitter, but my name's not there, my face is
Now you know
it's
my
secret
name,
job.
me too.
So we've got a bunch of agents who maintain the various company-branded accounts. And then there's a third level of personas, and that could be a high-level executive who wants to maintain a social media presence on behalf of the company. It could be a technical expert who wants to do the same. And both agents and personas get a much higher level of training and attention than would an individual. Agents, we have quarterly conference calls, we have regular email exchanges to make sure that they're aware of what's changed, what might be different, what might affect them in their ability to do their jobs. And with personas, there's much more intense attention in terms of making sure they're aware of how to use the tools, what they might be using them, what's the best audience and the best approach for them to take. So the more specific it gets in terms of the company and its brand, the more attention you'll want to pay in terms of training and education.
I think that stratification is a great idea. Here's the answer to the difference between social media and anything else. I'm Dave Farron. How are you? Nice to meet you. I'm Dave Farron. How are you? Nice to meet you. It's amplification, and it gets you out to more ears and eyes.
Yeah.
With that brilliant insight, I'm handing it over to you.
I'm not sure how I'm supposed to follow that. Richard Brown, Metro Hartford Alliance. As you talk about the different implications of social media policies and what have you, one of the things I don't think we've really delved into, and I'd love to hear your perspective on, is the generational gap and how that influences what you do as a company with social media. Most companies are hiring young folks, and the people who are making the policies are scared of this social media, are more seasoned in the workforce. So how do you tackle it?
I resemble that remark. Jess, you mentioned that your company is attracting quite a few young folks in this new generation. Tell us a little your perspective on that.
Yeah, we have a pretty good blend, but I'd say the majority of our employees are in that 20 to 40 range. So a high percentage of our employees are very, very active in social media. And then there's definitely a group of people who aren't. And so even on a social level, they're always a little bit left out. You know, it's a pretty interesting thing. And it recently came up at one of our strategic planning meetings that we really need to focus on this. And out of the 6 people in the room, it was kind of like half and half generational. And I'm not going to go into ages, don't worry. But half and half as far as where people stood. And it was actually the younger group that said, we definitely need a policy to protect our company.
That's a good insight, right?
And the older people are like, well, what's the big deal? Well, who's even using this?
Yes.
So if you're not using it and you're not involved, you don't see it as a threat. You don't see it or an opportunity, to be honest with you. So it's actually, as the younger leaders are evolving in the company, they're the ones that are feeling uncomfortable. I mean, I have a lot of these really high potential employees that come to me and say, I saw something, somebody posted something, I don't know what to do with it, I feel like it's inappropriate, but I don't want to say anything because they're my friend. And so I think there is very much an awareness, even in the younger generation, that this could be more of a problem than we even thought it could, so.
Dan?
I think telling, employees of a certain generation that they can't use social media, it's like telling your employees of a later generation, you can't use your phone to do business. You go, well, that's ridiculous. I need it as a communications tool. To a generation that's coming out that has been on Facebook now for 5, 6, 7 years, it is part of how they communicate.
Exactly.
And telling them not to use it is not a realistic option anymore. There are 1.2 billion people on Facebook. They're not all going to wake up tomorrow and just say, I don't want to use it anymore. It's just not happening. And yes, it's not as cool perhaps as it used to be, but since everyone's on it, it becomes the de facto place that you have to be there if you're in that space. And if you're not there, your employees are still talking about you. I think, again, you look at it from a generational side, I view it as an opportunity as well. You can get your younger employees to be involved, to teach other people how to use it or some of the useful aspects of it. And I think it's a mindset. I mean, to use my parents as an example, my parents are now on Facebook. That generation is now adopting it because they have to, just like text messages. Anyone who has kids, has realized that's how you're communicating, even to the kid who's upstairs in your house. Just they'll respond to their text. I think, don't be scared by it if you haven't been involved with it, if you haven't been on yet. It's not too late. It's not like you've missed the bandwagon on it. I think learn it. What I sort of encourage is be a stalker first. Just sort of be there, follow
I
things.
think lurker is better than stalker.
Lurker, yeah. It's probably a little more legal too. But you know, be out there and just sort of see what's going on. See what people are saying about your company. See what your employees are doing, or what your competitors are doing. Because if you're not out there, you can sure bet your competitors are, and they're going to try to take advantage of it.
I think a quick take on that is that if you really want to know where the expertise lies, you have to work with the young generation, because they have the deepest. And I like the idea, though, that they're understanding the negative consequences for themselves and for their company if media is misused. So that's a very good sign. Question?
Good morning, my name is Michael Lynch. First of all, thank you for your expertise. One of the words that keeps coming up in some of your comments is culture, and I love the subject of company culture and how social media has exposed company culture. Seeing that leadership, vision, and mission, clarity of that, and the hiring process all play a role in creating company culture. Do any of you work with people on those issues on the front end so that there isn't an obsession with having to deal with and enforce a social media policy?
Yeah, we do. I'm not sure what question is in there.
I'm just curious as to how does it play out? In what ways do you work with businesses in that area?
Sure. So company culture is something that we do with our clients, and it's, you know, it can seem like a huge kind of, you know, topic to take on. Our clients are usually really seasoned. They've been in business 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So the culture has been built with or without them. It's ingrained. And then the business is evolving and changing, and there are ways that they either want to take some of that culture with them to the future or leave some of it behind. You know, a great example is we worked with the Newman's Own Foundation, and they were going through, you know, quite a change when Paul Newman died, because the brand of the Newman's Own Foundation was attached directly to Paul Newman. And the younger generations coming up, maybe they kind of know him from a movie that their dad watches, or they, you know, he used to race cars, but you know, associating an entire foundation that it gives away, you know, billions of dollars and does so much good work in the world to one man doesn't really benefit, you know, their foundation and the brand of it moving forward. So helping them understand how they could keep the spirit of Paul Newman, but then move forward and open up and expand, you know, that brand to the world is really important work. There's another company that we work with that they started as a family-owned business, and they're no longer a family-owned business. So they've evolved, but they want to keep, you know, those values and those really good elements that they've created, that where the company started from. They want to keep that, but they also want to grow and evolve and attract talent that, you know, the talent can step into a culture. It doesn't feel like it's exclusive or, you know, set in the past, you know. So helping them understand how to look to the future and also bring the best things from the past is, you know, a lot of the work that we do. And that, you know, going back to social media, you know, it's either on display, clearly, you know, I think that's one thing companies need to understand is you are exposed and on display whether you want it or not. So getting really clear about how your culture and your values are internally will ultimately go to the outside world. So it's really important work.
And let's remember that culture is not an it. Culture is manifested by each and every person who's affiliated with an
Absolutely.
organization, and they've all got these.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just add one thing to that as well. You know, something that we focus a lot on, even when we're hiring and even just in a first interview, we talk a lot about loyalty, company loyalty. We talk a lot about every employee's role in representing our company, branding our company. We talk a lot about camaraderie. So I think culturally, that's something that really directly plays into social media. So when you're going to post something, or when you're going to write something, or thinking about those things, you know, am I being a good employee? Am I being loyal to my company? Am I being respectful to to my coworkers. Am I helping my company? Am I hurting my company? Am I helping my career? Am I hurting my career? So talking about a lot of those things early on really helps it tie in. So you don't have to say, well, don't forget, you're not allowed to do this. It's what are your actions doing, and what does it say about some of the fundamental philosophies of us as a company? And one thing I just want to mention, we talked about some of the sample policies that we've all seen out there, and one of the ones that really struck me when I was researching was Best Buy's, because they have a tagline attached to it. It's not, we're not your mama, but it's be smart, be respectful, be human. And I thought that that was really kind of cool, and at first I was like, well, what does be human mean? But then after reading it, it really started to make a lot of sense. And I like having that, because then you can say, you don't have to say, remember, section 1.2.3 of the policy where it states, you're saying, are you being smart, are you being respectful, and are you being human? And the way that that particular policy was written, it was a bullet style, which was easy to read, but it had headers like what you should do with social media, what you should not do with social media. And I really liked that, because it was so easy to read, and it was simple, and it had that sort of framework of including the tagline, which I just thought was really interesting.
Moving into our last few minutes, I have one more question here.
Hi, good morning. I'm Dave Darasinski, and I'm an HR consultant. And one of the clients I've been working with most recently is a retail banking organization. And very interestingly, all the things that you mentioned about setting a policy, or first of all, trying to set a policy and all of that, I think we've learned that on our own, throughout the last year or so. But one of the things, I have a very brief story which I thought maybe people could relate to, and it was this. In our business, we typically hire, for the front lines, customer service roles, we hire the generation that we've been talking about that is very comfortable with these devices, and that's how they communicate. So in our organization, in order for these folks to be successful and communicate effectively with one another, to pass work between each other or to resolve a problem, we found, we did not have a policy about this, but that the quickest way to get to a coworker was to text them using their own device. And that was fine. I mean, we didn't accept that. It became rampant, and the devices were out all the time, and customers were waiting in line while someone was texting, and they didn't see it as appropriate. So we decided, okay, no more of these. They can't be visible. You can't use it. We imported a Google chat system in the organization. We communicated it. We didn't do enough about the rules of the road. Anyway, long story short is that what we found, our IT department was monitoring that system. And we found that it was being used for a lot more than business. It was a substitute for this kind of device, and then we had to set a policy around appropriate use. It's not okay to address a coworker in another branch, what are you doing Friday, let's go out, or something like that. So my question then in all of this is that as we've struggled and tried to put policy, we're always chasing after it. It seems like we haven't really figured it out. My question then is, there is that dividing line really between, in the generation we have now, the new generation, between what's personal use of a device versus work. And how do you navigate that?
Everything anymore. That's how you did things 20 years ago. You controlled everything. When they came in, they were your employee forever. Now, I'm not suggesting that you don't have to enforce performance rules and everything else. You can still require the same things you did 15, 20 years ago. Just recognize that the idea that someone is never going to use their phone is probably not a realistic option in many situations. Now, for customer service, banking, for doctor's offices, you're going to have extra rules that you're going to have in place because of the regulatory environment that you may be in. So I think rather than focus on what are the controls we're going to put into place, another way to look at it is how much are we going to trust our employees to do the right thing, and what tools are we going to give them, what education, what guidelines to help them make good choices. And when someone screws up, are we going to, what's the appropriate level of response to that? Again, I think understanding social media, not being afraid of it, developing a system that fits your company, those are some ideas that will work well.
Jess, work, private, where's the line?
Right, well, the line is definitely very blurred, and it's a difficult thing to interpret. I'm struggling with the same thing as well. I mean, you can read different things about, well, if it's off hours on a home computer or a non-company owned device, it's a different line. But, you know, most of the time I've found that in these policies, they don't make a distinction between what device, you know, who owns the device in which they're blogging from or tweeting from. It's really more, how does it pertain to their job, to their company, to the company's reputation, to the company's information. So I wish I had the answers. If I find them, I'll let you know.
But I heard the word trust, and I think that's a key one.
Yeah,
And,
I
Suzie?
really have not much more to add to what Dan and Jessica said. The proof is in the pudding. If you trust your employees and they break that trust, then you deal with it then.
And Rob?
Definitely blurred lines, but our policy actually admits that people can't do it from work, so they have to do it on their personal devices, and if they choose to engage, we guide them accordingly. Most employees don't have access to their desks, so if they're accessing Twitter or Facebook, it's on a handheld. The policy admits that. It's not a deal breaker for new hires, but for those who want to engage, and specifically for those who want to talk about work, we have some guidance in place, and that's how our policy is structured.
Well, at this point, first I want to thank you for those great questions. And now I want you to join me in thanking a fantastic panel.
David, thank you very much for another outstanding job as our moderator for the session today.
Gotta go do the Lord's work now. I have a class.
Right back to the classroom. Don't be late.
And I want to tell you, every single student on our campus now walks like this. Occasionally you'll see one without one in their hand, and you go, wow, you don't have a phone in your hand. And I'll go, oh yes I do. You know, they have them holstered.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all, you're a great group.
Let's give David one big You know, I normally will summarize what we heard here during one of these sessions, and I don't know if you agree with me or not, but I think we're all millionaires. There were so many good gold nuggets that we heard from this panel today on one topic with so many different dimensions. It was quite exciting, interesting, innovative, and I guess I was just being photographed, so that'll be up somewhere on some website, I'm sure. But you know, that's the purpose of the university. Since 1849, it has been to educate, to advise, to provide direction, and to help people interact with their environment. And these breakfast sessions, and today's topic in particular, I think, really demonstrates that well. Whether you're in banking, in healthcare, or manufacturing, we have all those industries represented here today, and many others. Whether you're an incubator, a startup company, and you're small, whether you're a maturing business and growing, this issue impacts all of us on so many different levels. So I want to thank you all for coming. I think early on we talked about a structure. I think, Rob, you brought that up. A social media policy forms a structure, and if I can bring it to one element, a structure for doing business, a tool for direction and how to run that business, and information for the employees on how to conduct business on behalf of the company. I hope that you will continue to join us for our breakfast. This is Alumni Week. We have Kathy Joseph. You could raise your hand in the back. Kathy is handling all the activities of Alumni Week. This is the first event that we had here at ITBD during the week to kick off Alumni Week. We have a golf tournament tomorrow with the football team. Class reunion night at, some of us knew it as the pub, now semesters. And then on Saturday, the football game over at Rook Field. We hope that you check out our website and, at the university and register or attend some of those events and meet some friends. I want to personally thank the panel for the time they put in on a conference call, developing the content for today's session. I think we hit the nail on the head. Thank you all very much. We do have the New Britain Herald here, and Scott Whipple would like to talk with the panelists afterwards, so maybe we could get together and in one of the other rooms with Cindy and Scott and have that discussion. I'd like to thank Cindy Walker for the great job in putting this whole event together. Thank you, Cindy, and the manager of our conference center. If you have any needs for your business for meetings, Cindy, if you could raise your hand, everybody can see you over there by the door. Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you in February, if not before, on business evaluation, another hot topic, and then in April on affordable health care. Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful day.